Good. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our monthly Fusatsu atonement ceremony. Feels very good to me to be with you tonight. It's been, for me, a challenging week, a difficult week, and I feel a little frazzled, but it's always good to come back to the Zendo after a week like this and settle into the zazen and settle into the space and settle into our liturgical forms. It's like a refuge for me. So, Fusatsu, atonement. This is our the ceremony that we do every month to come to terms with the karma in our lives. And I think what's really important about the ceremony is that it begins right off the bat by recognizing that we are complicit in all evil karma ever committed. Since of old, on account of our beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of our body, mouth, and thought, I think it's, if you don't like the word complicity, we could say I'm responsible. If you don't like the word responsible, we could say you're connected to it. You're not separated from all evil karma. All evil karma meaning all of the actions that cause harm, that cause suffering. We are connected to all of that. And to me, there's something liberating about acknowledging that. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how woke you are. It doesn't matter how enlightened you are. You are complicit in all of it. So you can't get out of it. So it's kind of a relief to know that. Difficult week, challenging week. Whenever I hear helicopters and sirens and chanting, then it starts to, I start to feel the burden. For me, it was difficult because I work at a campus here in Manhattan, and we had a big blow up the past few days, which you're all aware of, I'm sure. This has to do with the protests over the Israeli occupation of Gaza and to the university administration's sending in of police forces to shut down the protests. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this from my own perspective, which is not the perspective of an Israeli or a Palestinian or a expert on Middle Eastern politics or history or culture, or from, I'm no legal expert on any of these matters. I'm someone who works at NYU. I teach students there. I have colleagues there. I live on NYU campus in the neighborhood where all this was happening. And I also talk to Zen students here at the Zendo about what's going on. And I also try to be in line with the Zen precepts. So I don't have the final word, but I can tell you a few stories about my experience. I was doing zazen on Monday morning, and I started hearing a lot of chanting, and didn't know what that was about. But after zazen, I opened my email, and there was a call explaining that the students had occupied Gould Plaza in front of the business school, at 4 a.m. that morning. And around 4:30, the police had intervened to try to dislodge them, and they were somehow dissuaded from that. And so there was a call for faculty to go and just be present and witness what was going on, and to be there to defend students if there was violence of some sort. So I went over, this is only a block from my house, and I was there for a couple of hours, and it was actually very tranquil, not a big crowd, but students had set up a camp on this plaza. And it was pretty mellow mood, actually, although there was talk about the what had happened in the morning, and there was also fear that there could be another police action. But it was pretty pleasant. I met someone who I'd only corresponded with over email. He was there with his 2-year-old child, and they were drawing in colors with chalk on the plaza. After a while, I went off. I had other business, and I went back around midday. There was a rally going on, a lot of noise. A lot more people had shown up in front of the plaza, which was now barricaded off, so you couldn't get in or out. And a lot more people. It was pretty rambunctious, boisterous. I knew one of the students who was speaking. He's actually one of my students. And so I wanted to be there and see what was happening. And it was pretty intense. I don't think it was more intense than a lot of other rallies I've seen at NYU. I think back to after George Floyd was killed, or Michael Brown, or invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. But it was still, there was a lot of energy. And some fiery discourses. I didn't perceive anti-Semitic actions or speech, but someone else might have interpreted what was going on in those terms. There was a small counter-protest across the street, and I think that if I'd been in the shoes of the counter-protesters, I probably would have been a little scared by the situation, because it was pretty daunting, the energy that was going on. And then I had other things to do. I came back at the end of the afternoon because there was another rally happening, and there were some people speaking who were actually colleagues of mine in the history department. Several who were also standing up there in front of the encampment. All of them Jewish, by the way. And again, there was a lot of energy in the crowd, and yeah, it was boisterous. And then I had to go off to another event on campus, and just as that event was ending, I got the word from a student there that the police had intervened and were arresting people. And so I was a few blocks away, so I went back to see what was going on. And sure enough, there was a huge police presence, lots of vans, big buses to take people off. And they were removing the camp, and they were taking a number of students, detaining them, and a number of faculty were also detained, including colleagues of mine. I talked to a lot of faculty who were there over the course of the day or when the police intervened. I talked to students also who were there about what happened. And it's interesting that the police intervened right after a Seder celebration within the camp. And it was right before the Muslim prayers were supposed to begin. That's when the police went in. The people I talked to had a very different account of what had happened that afternoon and that evening from what the administration reported, and then what the media started reporting, which reflected a lot of the administration's account. So a number of colleagues ended up being taken down to one police plaza. One colleague of mine who's in his 70s and disabled and very mild-mannered ended up being held for 7 hours. And it was physically quite difficult for him. And after that had happened, the protesters started to filter around through the surrounding streets, and I was over by my building with another colleague, and there was a skirmish on the street, and I couldn't tell what was happening, but a lot of people were there filming, and then I saw sort of next to me two young girls, one wearing a keffiyeh headscarf and another holding her dog, and the younger one was crying, and I looked at them, and then I suddenly realized that they're the girls who live across the hall from me in my apartment building. And so I went over to them to see if they were okay, and they weren't very forthcoming. And then I saw that their mother was arriving. She's Palestinian, she teaches at NYU. They rushed off to her. And then the next thing I knew, they started rushing into the street. And I saw the police were leading away, like a half dozen police, leading away a man who I looked at and I realized was my next door neighbor. And he's also Palestinian. And as they led him away, he said, "I just want Palestine to be free," is what he said. So I followed him to the police van, and I saw him put in, and they drove him off. And then I went and checked in with my neighbors. This is a man I don't know too well, but I've had some conversations with, and I know that he's lost about 24 relatives to the bombings in Gaza. So that was Monday night, and then Tuesday, there is an association of professors at NYU that the American Association of University Professors that released a statement that was contesting a lot of the description of what had happened according to the administration. So one of my colleagues sent out the statement on public media, and she turned off the response, so she couldn't see what the responses would be because she knew that it could be upsetting to some people. But someone had taken the trouble to track down her email and write to her separately by email, and in some very choice language, obscene language, racial slurs, misogynist slurs, and accusations of political extremism. They had threatened her. And then the next day I was to teach my class with the undergraduate students. I realized that I was going to need to have a conversation about what was going on our campus. And I was a little afraid of having that conversation because I didn't know how it would go. I thought that they might just say nothing, or they might get really upset, or some people could storm off or feel uncomfortable about being put on the spot. And about an hour before the class met, I got an email from one student who said that he was practicing Jew. The situation had reached the point that he felt so uncomfortable and so unsafe, not only on campus, but in the city, that he had decided to move back into his parents' house in Brooklyn. So then I had the conversation in class. I tried to set it up as a place where people would really listen to each other and also be able to express themselves honestly, but respectfully and in a civil and tolerant way. And then I just opened it up for them. And I have to say, the response was really surprising me. They were very thoughtful. They were very reasoned in their comments. and very insightful, very sophisticated in their comments. One student said that he'd never seen such a important thing happen in the 5 years, actually, that he'd been at NYU. This was the most, this had sort of struck him more deeply than anything else. And it made him realize for the first time that whereas normally in the past he'd been pretty cynical about politics in general, he felt like he suddenly realized that some things were more important than just his own little self. But the comment that was most common that a number of students talked about was the real problem is that we don't have any chance to communicate about what's going on. Their protests started in the student center. They put up barriers in the student centers so that students couldn't go in there and assemble. And now they've erected a big wall outside of Gold Plaza so that no one can get in or out except under strict control. So these walls have been going up, and the students were saying, you know, the biggest problem with where the administration has handled this is they went straight for the violent or authoritarian, in their words, response, rather than allowing for some kind of discussion between students and administration, between different kinds of students. So I thought that was very, very insightful of them. And that evening I came to the Zendo, and I ended up talking to a Zen student, one of a number of students in our community who have been practicing very deeply with the conflict that's been going on in the Middle East and its repercussions here. Again, I appreciated their openness and the depth with which they were reflecting on issues and responding to the issues. And they too emphasized the fundamental problem of communication. So this brings us, what does all this have to do with our practice? A lot. It has a lot to do with our practice. And it has a lot to do with the precepts, which is what we're here for this evening. So we talk about the first three precepts, the three treasures we talk about in terms of the Zen peacemaker order, not knowing, that is approaching the situations in our lives hopefully without so much prejudice, with a kind of open mind, and then bearing witness to really see what's going on around us, and then taking some kind of action that is consistent with what we're seeing in front of us. It's appropriate based on what we're seeing in front of us. There are a lot of different kinds of actions that we can take. Some actions lead to harm, evil karma, and some actions are more skillful. And I think that our practice and studying the precepts can help us to address things more skillfully. The kind of action that I want to focus on now is speech. And it's interesting that of the 10 grave precepts, most of them are about speech. And so what I want to talk about now is free speech. The issue on campus around the country is free speech. There are a series of norms about free speech on college campuses that come from the conflicts in the 1960s and 70s and have shaped academic culture on campus and in classrooms, and have always been disputed. They've always been involved gray areas and difficult problems, and we've been hitting up against the blurriness and the difficulty of determining where free speech rights come to an end and where harmful speech arises through intimidation or bullying or all sorts of bigotry, racism. So this is a problem that we're grappling with at the moment. And all of those norms, I think, are up in the air right now. But I think that as much as I respect and appreciate the norms of free speech in this country and on college campuses, our Zen practice is pointing to a deeper way of, a deeper kind of free speech. And that's what I want to turn to now. So the precept that I wanted to focus on is the 7th grade precept of not demeaning others and elevating oneself. And I think that actually the Zen literature is full of commentary on this issue. In fact, in a way, all Zen training has to do with this problem, and all Zen training has to do with free speech. So it's all over, this question is all over the Zen literature, it's all over the koans. For example, Blue Cliff Record, case 71, Wu Feng's "Shut Up, Teacher." Goso said, "If you meet a man of Tao on the way, greet him neither with words nor with silence. Now tell me, how will you greet him?" Neither with words nor with silence, how will you greet him? This is a problem of free speech. When we look at this in terms of the precepts, there are a variety of perspectives. From a very literal point of view, I think that what this precept is about is just don't speak ill of Israelis and just don't speak ill of Palestinians. Don't demean Jewish people, don't demean Muslim people. Very simple. Anytime you do that, you've fallen into a trap, and it's not free speech. The Zen Peacemaker Order has, I think, a very helpful interpretation of what this precept is about. It says, "Speaking what I perceive to be the truth without guilt or blame. This is the precept of not elevating oneself and blaming others." So first of all, it's saying that we do need to be able to speak up. In terms of our ethical conduct, we need to be able to speak up and speak what I perceive to be the truth, what I perceive to be the truth, which may not be the whole truth. But nonetheless, even if I don't have the property rights to the truth, I do have my own perception of it, and I can speak up about that. But it adds without guilt or blame. And this is something I think that we can all look at carefully. When we start into a discourse of shaming others or ourselves, what does that feel like? So here I'm especially focusing on the way we blame others, but it could also apply to ourselves. When we blame ourselves for things, what are we doing there? How skillful and constructive is that? We we may need to take stock and reckon with our conduct, but what does the shaming or blaming do? And I think that one way to think about this is to be very careful when we fall into a discourse of righteousness. That to me feels like where that guilt or blame can kick in situations like these. And you can feel the energy in your body, when you're being self-righteous. There's an even deeper way to think about the precepts. So Bodhidharma said, self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the equitable Dharma, not dwelling upon I against you is called the precept of not praising yourself while abusing others. Not dwelling upon I against you. That is, not setting up this fundamental duality. And this is just taking us back to where we started tonight with the verse of atonement, that ultimately we are totally interdependent, and that in our largest, in the largest sense, we are not separate. And Dogen Zenji says something along the same lines, emphasizing, Bodhidharma calls it the fundamental equality of all beings. Dogen Zenji says, Buddhas and ancestral teachers realize the empty sky and the great earth. When they manifest the noble body, there is neither inside nor outside in emptiness. When they manifest the Dharma body, there's not even a bit of earth on the ground. So again, Dogen is taking us to the deepest level where, again, there's only one body, entirely noble, the Dharma body, and there is no inside or outside, no native and no foreigner, no immigrant and no native, no borderlands, no walls constructed between self and other. Not even a bit of earth on the ground. There's no I, there's no you, there's no Israel, there's no Palestine, there's no New York City, there's no Greenwich Village. So that can sound sort of high, lofty and unreal, but it's something that you can actually experience on your cushion in zazen, and you can experience this evening if you give yourself over completely to the bowing and the chanting. One last case I wanted to bring in. Sorry, this is Blue Cliff Record 71, Wu Fang Shut Up Teacher. So Pai Chang asked Wu Fang, with your throat, mouth, and lips shut, how will you speak? Fang said, teacher, you too should shut up. Chang said, where there's no one, I shade my eyes with my hand and gaze out towards you. With your throat, mouth, and lips shut, how will you speak? You have to say something. Can you speak freely? Fang said, teacher, you too should shut up. Returning to silence, to the point that Bodhidharma and Dogen were pointing to, where there's no separation. It could also be a place of speaking freely. But Chang says, where there's no one, I shade my eyes with my hand and gaze out towards you. Where there's no one, no I, no you, no Israel, no Palestine. I look up and I look out and I see you. I cup my ears, my hand around my ears, and I hear you. So I think this is a wonderful expression of listening freely and speaking freely. I see you and I talk to you. I hope we can really take seriously the precept of not elevating ourselves and demeaning others, and really do the difficult work of communicating, even when it can be very scary, even when it can be very difficult. Good luck to all of us.